The Wall Street Journal, 9th of November 2023, take the moral high ground in regards to Palestinian deaths, China-funded and Russia-managed. China is the natural source of funding for Hamas's fight against the United States as part of its plan to establish numerous fronts of conflict. China and Russia, the two repressive autocracies that are America's main geopolitical rivals, are taking advantage of the bloody war in Gaza to gain international support. This allows them to portray themselves as champions of peace and humanitarian values and to capitalize on a wave of sympathy for the Palestinian people. Even though Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu used billboards featuring Russian President Vladimir Putin during last year's election, Beijing and Moscow have maintained close ties with Israel for decades. However, they have purposefully refrained from criticizing Hamas for the October 7 attack on southern Israel that started the conflict. Since then, Russia and China have distanced themselves from Israel and concentrated on portraying the conflict as a global power struggle against the United States, with Israel being reduced to little more than Washington's regional pawn. Putin, whose troops have destroyed multiple cities in Ukraine, stated last week in a speech that he feels his fists clench and eyes tear up when he sees the Israeli shelling of Gaza. He declared that the conflicts fought by Russian soldiers in Ukraine will decide the fate of Russia, and of the entire world, including the future of the Palestinian people, as they battle against the same American root of evil. Since the conflict started, China's stance has become more muted, and Xi Jinping has refrained from public remarks about the Middle East. On the other hand, Beijing's demands for an early ceasefire and Palestinian statehood have been juxtaposed with American warmongering and hypocrisy in the Middle East by Chinese official media. China has stated that it shares Russia's stance on the Palestinian problem, and the two countries joined forces last month to veto a resolution on the conflict that the United States had sponsored. China's UN envoy Zhang Jun made a subtle allusion to the United States when he stated, countries should uphold the moral conscience, rather than clinging on to geopolitical calculations, let alone double standards. China will persist in advocating for global equity and justice, upholding international law, and supporting the justifiable goals of the Arab and Islamic communities. Wang Huiyao, the president of the Beijing-based Center for China and Globalization think tank and a former government advisor, continued, Washington should give up its long-standing hostile attitude toward China in light of the situation in the Middle East. They really ought to stop viewing China as an adversary. The Israeli-Palestinian issue will present them with even more challenges on top of the Russian war in Ukraine. He stated, they shouldn't threaten China as well. They ought to work with China on these international issues and view China as a partner and a peacemaker. Hamas has gratefully received such messaging. One of the group's principal leaders, Khalid Mashal, stated that Hamas aspires to cooperate with great powers China and Russia in a recent TV interview. He continued by saying that China might draw inspiration from Hamas's raid for its intentions to seize Taiwan and that Russia has profited from the attack on October 7 since it has drawn American focus away from Ukraine. The United States and the majority of other Western countries view Hamas, whose members killed almost 1,400 Israelis and kidnapped hundreds more on October 7, as a terrorist group, in contrast to Russia and China. Despite the rhetoric, neither China nor Russia has the ability or the desire to engage in direct conflict in the Middle East at a time when the United States is re-entering the region in large numbers to defend its allies and partners, including by deploying 3 aircraft carrier groups and a sizable number of aircraft and air defense assets. However, the mere act of diplomacy is augmenting their soft power in poor nations, where anger over the thousands of civilian deaths resulting from the Israeli bombing of Gaza has been building for several weeks. Recalls of Israeli ambassadors have been made by distant nations like South Africa, Colombia, and Chile in protest. Bolivia has completely cut diplomatic ties with Israel. China's goal of connecting with the developing world on a global scale will be served by its support of the Palestinian cause, according to Li Mingjiang, a foreign policy expert from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Another factor is the politics of great powers. China sees a chance to use politics to align itself with most of the world's nations against the U.S. position. Russia is even more keen to alter the story and break free of its isolation after facing international censure and penalties from the West for its invasion of Ukraine. It makes sense to adopt a policy strengthening Russia's ties to the Arab world. Because of the circumstances surrounding Ukraine, Moscow now views the Global South as crucial, according to Nikolai Koshinov, a professor at Qatar University and a former Russian diplomat stationed in Tehran. Russia understands that the events in Gaza are driving the Global South away from the West and the US and could change its perspective to be more accommodating to Moscow. Russia has a long history of crimes in Ukraine and other places. In 2000, Putin took office and immediately set about demolishing Grozny, the capital of the then rebellious Muslim Republic of Chechnya. In 2016, a Russian bombing campaign in Syria reduced a large portion of Aleppo to rubble. Additionally, at least 25,000 Ukrainian people perished during the months-long Russian siege of Mariupol, Ukraine, last year, according to municipal officials. Mariupol is a city that the Russian Air Force could attack without worrying about air defenses. Because the UN and other independent agencies were never allowed access to Mariupol and the victims were regularly shoved into the rubble or buried in mass graves, the total toll may never be known. Meanwhile, U.S. authorities claim that China imprisoned in internment camps over 1 million Muslims from its western Xinjiang region, the population of the Gaza Strip as a whole. China claimed that these camps offered career prospects, and the majority of the world's major Muslim countries have remained silent in the face of China's oppressive practices in Xinjiang. The director of the University of Pennsylvania's Penn Project on the Future of U.S.-China Relations, Nissan Mahboubi, stated that the Palestinian issue is more relevant in the Muslim world than the specific issue. He said China has an opportunity to shape an image of being a responsible world power, and more so than its competitors, including the United States, given the harmful effects the war in Ukraine is having on Russia's reputation around the world and the criticism America is receiving for its support of Israel. Russia and China have a lengthy history of being involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Viewing Arab monarchies as stand-ins for Western imperialism, the Soviet Union supported the establishment of the Jewish state in 1947 at the UN General Assembly. It was the first country to recognize Israel upon its declaration of independence the following year. Additionally, it contributed to its survival by persuading Czechoslovakia, then under Soviet authority, to ship weaponry. But Moscow broke off diplomatic ties with Israel in 1967 and soon started providing significant military backing to its adversaries in the Arab world. China's communist government had flatly refused to acknowledge Israel. Only after the Cold War ended did China and Russia establish embassies in Tel Aviv. As hundreds of thousands of Russian Jews immigrated to Israel, relations rapidly improved, and Israel developed into a central hub for the transfer of Western technologies to China. During a visit with Putin in Moscow in 2018, Netanyahu wore the St. George's ribbon, a symbol of Russian military prowess that has also come to be seen as support for Russian aggression in Ukraine. This summer, amid disagreements with the Biden administration on proposed judicial reforms, Netanyahu shared a picture of himself with a book signed by Xi that the Chinese ambassador had given him. The post caused some controversy in Washington. Only a strong partnership with the United States can protect Israel in the current situation, as demonstrated by the assistance the Biden administration has shown thus far, according to Tuvia Gehring, a China researcher at Tel Aviv University's Institute for National Security Studies. Israel has no other choice, he declared. China isn't impartial. It isn't very friendly to Israel and gives those who want to destroy us more momentum. It has shown no concern for our pain and is taking advantage of it for its geopolitical objectives. Putin, who once regarded Israel's neutrality and denial to comply with Western sanctions against Ukraine, attributed the recent ice with Israel partly to Russia's changing demography. As a result of increased birth rates in Muslim regions and widespread migration from Central Asia, the estimated percentage of Muslims in Russia is currently at 25%. Unrest has already started in numerous Muslim republics in the northern Caucasus as a result of the slaughter in Gaza. Local vigilante groups raided hotels in search of Jewish guests in late October amid rumors that the region's Jews who had emigrated to Israel would be returning as refugees. On October 29, they stormed the Makashkala International Airport following the arrival of a scheduled flight from Tel Aviv, waving Palestinian flags and chanting Allahu Akbar. Since then, 200 people have been arrested by Russian authorities. Putin's ideological push to reinstate Soviet-era standards, which also includes rewriting textbooks, building monuments to Stalin, and demolishing what little of Russia's democratic institutions remain, is a more significant component than any other. This has also resulted in improved relations with friends from the Soviet era, like North Korea. In the words of former Russian Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrev, who currently resides in the West, it's all part of Russia's overall slide back to Soviet times, to Soviet thinking, to Soviet traditions. This is consistent with the general confrontational neo-Soviet approach towards the West. And now it's Israel's time.